we spend 90% of our time indoors. The standard of the buildings where we live, learn, work, and play impacts not only our health, but the quality of our lives. Buildings are responsible for 41% of all energy consumption, 13.6% of all potable water usage, and 73% of electricity used in the U.S. LEED has transformed the way we think about how buildings and communities are designed, constructed, maintained. LEED projects are responsible for diverting over 80 million tons of waste from landfills, a number that is expected to grow to 540 million tons of waste diversion by 2030, all while conserving water and energy. Reducing environmental impact, conserving resources, promoting energy independence, and saving money is at the core of what LEED is all about. Whether it's renovating your existing home or office building, or designing a building from scratch, LEED helps builders create and construct with people in mind. LEED matters because where we spend our time matters. Daylight, good acoustics, and healthy materials matter. Fresh, clean air and water matter. Design that encourages movement matters. LEED creates healthy spaces, keeping the bad out and bringing the good in. Cities in all 50 states and more than 150 countries are already saving money with the help of LEED. This could mean freeing up valuable resources that can be used to create new jobs, expand operations, and invest in emerging technologies. LEED is the most widely used green building rating system. With over 1.85 million square feet of real estate certified every day, there is no project too big or too small. From retrofits to new construction, to neighborhoods with single or multifamily homes, LEED helps leaders make the right choices for their communities. Better buildings are our legacy.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Melissa Baker. This is All Buildings and Places in Buildings, Performance, LEED, and the Ever-Changing Built Environment. We're so glad to have you here for the next couple of hours to talk, to share, and to hear from you. Growing and changing to meet the demands of the marketplace and capitalizing on new ideas and new technologies is intrinsic to the character of LEED. It's part of our movement's heritage, fueled by people who knew that we could do better, who wanted to challenge the status quo, and who knew that if we raised the bar, not just on environmental performance, but also on what it meant to have health and wellness in a building, we could change an industry. Continuous improvement keeps the rating system dynamic in our world that is constantly and very rapidly evolving. Project teams using LEED v4 have transformed the building market, working in over 3,000 projects globally. These projects are testaments to the effectiveness of the rating system and the people who had the vision and dedication to build them. But LEED must progress in order to remain the premier global green building rating system that all of us have invested so much in. More importantly, LEED must progress to meet our mission. It's been 4 years since LEED version 4 came to the market, and the market has had a lot to say. And we have listened, and we and the rating systems are better for it. We're excited to show you what's on the horizon, what's new and what's next in green building, and how we're pushing to accelerate the market on a path towards universal green buildings and communities within a generation. The future is now, and it is powered by this movement, by all of you. Your work in the last 2 decades is why we see so many projects using LEED globally to create healthy and productive buildings and communities. And that's why we're here. LEED is about the people. I want to first say thank you. Thank you for joining us. Engagements like these are very important to the advancement of LEED and all of our core products. And I hope you'll see how we're leveraging your feedback, making our products work harder and smarter for you and our global markets. Our CEO, Mahesh Ramanujam, has given us the mantra, partnership is the new leadership. As we work on our collective goals of environmental sustainability, health, wellness, and yes, profitability, all of us whom you'll hear from today fully believe in our commitment to partnership. I see a lot of familiar faces, and for those of you who I've yet to meet, I look forward to it. I've been involved in the advancement and transformation of LEED for over 10 years. As you can see, I started at a young age, just 15. Starting out, I led efforts on our market development team to engage with local, state, and federal governments and key departments and agencies, including the US military, on the implementation of LEED to support their sustainability, energy conservation, and energy independence goals. I then went on to work directly on the LEED rating system, helping to build the LEED for Healthcare rating system. In 2013, Mahesh asked me to build a small team of incredibly dedicated subject matter experts who could work to design and deploy solutions for organizations using LEED at a high volume. Since then, I've had the honor of leading this agile team, and it's really been the greatest pleasure of my working life to work with them. And it's grown into an international group of experts that serve as the bridge between our technical development and our customers across the globe who are working every day to make market transformation happen. And I hope we've worked with most of you. If we haven't, please let us know. We'd love to have that opportunity. Today, I stand in front of you as the Senior Vice President of the Technical Core of USGBC. If you're wondering what that means, you might not be alone. It isn't maybe the most descriptive title, but to us it means a lot. As part of our ongoing strategy of evaluating what works and what needs to be improved to lead to increased customer engagement and satisfaction, we've merged 3 critical customer touchpoints, or engines, as I like to think of them. And we brought it into one core operation. We've taken technical solutions, which is the team I was just describing, our education team, and our LEED technical development team, which is led by my friend and colleague Corey Enck, who's one of our architects of LEED version 4. You'll hear from Corey in just a bit today. We're excited to really try this approach, bring a higher standard of support for all LEED projects. I hope you'll notice a difference and continue to help us improve and anticipate your needs. Like you, we are all in, and I'm excited to get to work. As I said earlier, this session is heavily informed on what we've learned from you, specifically since we launched LEED version 4. We've learned a lot, and we're excited to share some important updates, and for you to continue to advise us on what is working and what might need a new approach. To us, that's really what partnership is all about. Today, we'll cover many aspects of our movement and the work we've accomplished together. We'll look at how green codes can set a baseline for a high-performance building, the lessons learned so far from LEED version 4, and what we plan to do with the feedback we've received to build from LEED version 4. And finally, the ways we can take 20 years of experience we have building and using LEED and find a framework to connect and enhance other rating systems to touch all aspects of the built environment and meet those common goals. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our one of our first speakers, a relatively new member to our team, Wes Sullins. Wes is also a LEED fellow. Wes is our Director of Building Codes Technical Development, and he is currently immersed in aligning the technical requirements of LEED to green building codes, including the Model IGCC and ASHRAE Standard 189.1. Prior to USGBC, Wes worked for 10 years in local government at Stopped Waste, managed sustainability programs, and participated in the development of Cal Green. We're thrilled to have him on our team, and I know he is excited to share our vision for forging a stronger connection between building codes and LEED. Thanks.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Melissa. Well, happy Greenbuild. Hope everyone's having a good first day, right? How's it going? Good? Excellent. And I have the honor of talking about green building codes before you have dinner, so that's always a challenge. But please bear with me. I think there's a lot of exciting things happening. And I wanted to start just by saying that green building codes, the prevalence of them, the uptake in them in the market, is a success story for the USGBC. And I don't mean that necessarily just for us as staff or as the folks that work on LEED, but really the entire community, the USGBC community of 200,000 plus LEED accredited professionals. those in government and federal agencies and owners that have been adopting and using LEED for many, many years have led to the mainstreaming of a lot of fundamental green practices that are now code ready. So we're excited to continue the evolution of LEED with that as a connection. And so let me first start by talking about an example of a green code in my home state that I live in, California. And in California, we have a statewide green code, and it's mandatory on almost every project that's built in the state. Now, where did this come from? California's been, of course, an environmental leader for a long, long time. They've got a strong energy code. They have a big presence, but importantly, they were also an early user and a heavy user of LEED, and that's something that has helped mainstream, again, a lot of those fundamental practices that are now ready to be in code. And so around 2007, when the green building was taking off, there was actually a movement to try to get LEED adopted as a statewide requirement or a reference or something like that. And we had a governor at the time, Schwarzenegger, who I'm not going to use the accent, but he basically said, we can do this ourselves. Let's put this into the building code. And he actually directed staff to develop a whole new chapter of California's building code, which is called Part 11, otherwise Cal Green. And this was a foundational moment. There was a lot of angst and a lot of enthusiasm as well for the green code, but it's been a steady progression since then. And Cal Green, if I can go to the next slide, is made up of a bunch of the same types of things you'll find in LEED, the things that we've all been working on for 20 plus years, right? The measure categories of indoor air and water and energy, of course, and waste. So those are all fundamental things that are now baked into a building code on every project almost. And of course, there's overlap with LEED when it comes to green codes. And the Cal Green really is kind of a subset of those fundamental best practices that were code ready, things that could be put into a mandatory code and be done on almost every project. And so it took us a little while, but by 2015, USGBC realized that this was something we needed to work on and help not only encourage green codes, but also make the LEED process simpler. If you're doing things in basic water conservation and construction recycling and some of the things you see on this list here, why are we making you do that in LEED and doubling up if you're already doing that as part of your code compliance and using that documentation? So we created these alternative documentation paths to try to lighten the load on LEED projects. And that was a foundational moment that we recognized and tried to reward the progress of places like California. But this list is not a very long list. I mean, there's 5 or 6 things there. Out of 100 points on a project, it may not make that big of a difference. But it signaled that we were getting serious to connecting codes in LEED. Now, just earlier this year, we announced a much bigger alignment. And this is now live. You can go to this website, usgbc.org/California LEED ACPs. And now basically every single prerequisite and 6 points are streamlined in LEED. If you're building to the code and you have all of these things in your scope, then you're essentially able to get these credits and prerequisites at a streamlined fashion. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons. A, to make the codes recognize the leadership that's happening in California and to make it easier on LEED. But also, this is sort of a two-way street. That we, as the community, have led to the mainstreaming of green codes, such as this, but it's really an evolution. We took part in the evolution that raised codes and made them a possibility. We want to be part of the revolution going on. So a good way for us to do that is to understand how codes are being complied with on project levels. So we're looking to take that input we learn from working with projects that are meeting the green codes and feeding back that into our rating systems and vice versa. And so we've had this vision for a number of years of how a green code, as that floor rises, as the green codes come online, it allows LEED, it kind of unleashes it to do some ratcheting up, to go above and beyond where it started, where it was. We really do need this relationship of the floor raising to enable us to pull the top higher, that it satisfies many, many things for our mission, and it allows us to be a more adaptive rating system, et cetera. And so we're working on a few active strategies. The first is the International Green Construction Code. We've been working with them for a number of years to publish both ASHRAE Standard 189 and the IGCC. And just next year, there will be a harmonized International Green Code that combines both of these into one document. And we're working to enable similar relationships like we've done in California for this code. So we'll be doing a crosswalk, looking at what are the LEED measures that line up with the International Green Code, in a way to help try and get more adoptions and bring whatever importance and encouragement, excitement we can get from LEED to this space. A way this might work is you have a set like this where you've got some credit categories that are fundamental in building codes, and maybe those ones at the bottom there are the ones that are code ready. Those are able to be required, able to be mandated on projects. Then you have these local stretch requirements. They could be a few, they could be large. You could have a net zero or some lofty energy goal that's part of a local requirement. But the idea is there's a stair step with LEED as a framework to help encourage best practices and exceed those minimums by getting rewarded for it. Another area we're working on is education and credentialing. So again, we have 200,000 plus LEED APs, LEED associates. We've got more coming. How can we leverage that expertise to help building codes, the code officials, the local governments, the folks that are now having to put this in their building code and want to get better, to go deeper, make this really mainstream as part of business? And so we're looking at ways to connect our credentialing and education to the code space. And finally, just to wrap up here, you've heard a lot about ARC. You'll hear more about it. We're also looking at how ARC as a platform can help this continuum as well. As local governments, as policymakers, et cetera, like to look more at transparency and data and get more information into buildings, especially about performance. What role can ARC play as an on-ramp to getting that information and sharing it? We think ARC has a lot of potential, not just for LEED, but outside of it, such as in codes. So we'll hear lots more about that. And I'm going to pass it along now back to Melissa. We'll hear more about this. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Wes. Great. So to continue the conversation, we're going to dive into a bit of an update on what we're working on for LEED. We're really now at a time where we're doing things through LEED that we never thought would be possible. But we're also asking ourselves, is it enough? Are we satisfied? Can we do more? At USGBC, our vision has always been green buildings for all within a generation. This is our foundation, and for all of us who come to work every day, this is our mission. The part that keeps me up at night is not the goal, the green buildings for all, it's the timeline within a generation. It's a pretty tight timeline. All of us in the room have accomplished a lot together. We've achieved some pretty impressive milestones. But if we're going to say that we have collectively met and fulfilled the vision of USGBC that was outlined starting in 1994, we need a different approach. The only way to do this, for us to achieve true market transformation, is to accelerate our efforts while staying true to the LEED framework. We have to be purposeful in our growth based on what the experts in the field, you, are telling us we need to achieve our mission. And for me, that strategy has a name, and it's LEED version 4.1. I'm so excited to be here today to be able to announce that we are working on the next version of LEED and share the details with you. That point 1 stands for the first change in strategy that we need to overlay over LEED version 4 to get us to this generation. It won't do it by itself, but it starts us on the right path. For those of you getting nervous, this is not LEED version 5. We're not going to do that to you yet. It's a new approach to LEED version 4. So let's talk about some of the things that I think the market's going to be pretty excited about. We're integrating performance into LEED version 4, utilizing the ARC platform to streamline performance reporting. We're paying close attention to ensure that LEED-certified buildings perform and that they fulfill the promise of design, as you and we said that they would. LEED version 4.1 O&M will be new, improved, and more agile to make it easier for every type of existing building to get LEED certified or be on the path to certification. And it will ensure that there are meaningful ways for all existing buildings to engage with LEED and to track their performance. We can't say that we're all in if one of the biggest opportunities we have working in existing buildings feel that there's nothing they can do and there's no way for them to get started. As a standards developing organization, we're always trying to be on the cutting edge, incorporating the latest research, but also balancing the ability for the market to adapt and not get too far out in front. A good example of that balancing act is the work that we've done in the materials credits in the MR category of LEED. There's some key areas where we've seen very rapid market transformation in the time since we started the conversation for development of version 4. In a market where there were just a handful of environmental product declarations, we now have thousands. And I've heard recently that in local codes and local standards, they've started to require environmental product declarations. But we also know, and we hear especially from international markets, that there are plenty of places in the world where materials with EPDs just aren't available. So we know we have some work to do. And we'll get into those details of the work with our next speaker. In addition, one of the bigger challenges we've heard about is regional integration and applicability of the rating system. That we have to find a way to truly substantiate that LEED strategies can be applied at the local level, no matter where you are in the world. Yes, LEED is a global rating system. It's currently being used in over 160 countries. But how do we get those countries, the regions and localities, to take ownership of the rating system and be sure that the strategies that we advocate for are applicable on that local level? I'm so happy to tell you that on Monday, we announced the formation of 6 regional LEED steering committees. This is huge. Each of the 6 will cover a region of the world: Latin America and the Caribbean, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Greater China, Asia Pacific, and of course our LEED steering committee that we have to cover the US and Canada. These regional LEED steering committees will guide our technical work around the globe and position us to remain competitive and ahead of the curve. So those are just some snapshots. We'll get into a little bit more detail on what's coming in version 4.1 in just a minute. But I do want to assure you, it is not a full version change. Instead, it's really a catalyst to make the work that we've done in LEED version 4 much more accessible. We've learned a lot in the last several years, and one key lesson has been that it takes all of us to move the market forward. We all must push, and we all must succeed. USGBC will follow its existing governance, present LEED version 4.1 for public comment, followed by a member ballot. We'll also allow project teams to test the rating system and provide feedback while version 4 remains open for use. That creates a streamlined experience for project teams and allows us to have a period of time where version 4 and version 4.1 are both open. It's a new way of working that lets us have version 4.1 open for use before it's validated. And one of my goals this year was to really make our rating system development process more iterative and more dynamic. Before I turn the podium over to Corey, I really want to say thank you for the feedback, for the project stories, for those of you that have used LEED version 4 and told us how it's gone, for those of you who have certified some of the first projects in the world, and for sharing your lessons with us. We're committing to a true partnership with you like you've never seen before. So now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Corey Enck. Corey collaborates with our volunteer technical committees and industry stakeholders as he leads the evolution and refinement of the LEED rating system. As I mentioned earlier, Corey was an architect for LEED version 4. He has a commitment and a dedication to getting this right and ensuring we have the best rating system for each of your markets, and it goes beyond anything that I've seen. I'm confident that Corey is the person who can execute the vision for LEED version 4.1 and beyond. So now he's going to talk to you about the implementation and evolution for USGBC and for the rating system. Corey? Oops.
Thanks, Melissa, and good afternoon. I do like to consider myself the engineer of LEED v4, not the architect. Slight difference there. As Melissa said, LEED version 4 was a comprehensive update. We started with a blank sheet of paper. We had a lot of pent-up energy in our committees and a lot of our stakeholder base to really see a lot of change in LEED version 4, and that's what we did. We started in 2009, developing LEED version 4, we had 6 public comment periods. We had 22,000 comments that we responded to. So we had a fairly extensive process to develop LEED version 4. LEED version 4.1 is not that. LEED version 4.1, as Melissa said, is a very targeted scope of changes. We've done 0.1 changes in the past with version 2. We expect the same with version 4. Also with version 4, it was the largest stakeholder outreach engagement we've ever had with LEED. So that was something that we want to model with version 4.1 as well. But the engagement with version 4 came very early in the process. So the 6 public comments came before anyone was able to even use the rating system. We put it out for beta towards the end after the 6 public comment period. So learning some lessons from the development process for LEED version 4, we really want to engage in more meaningful ways with version 4.1. So as you can see here, once we finish our technical development work for version 4.1, we will release the rating system to be used and tested by project teams before we enter the public comment period. So that will be out for a period of time until we feel like we've gotten substantive feedback, and then we will initiate the public comment and ballot period. And in terms of timelines, our technical committees and technical advisory groups are working on the development of version 4 right now. We do anticipate that process lasting until the end of this year, early next year, and releasing version 4.1 into the market as a test in Q1 of 2018. So again, hoping to get that feedback from stakeholders before we enter that public comment period. We will start with our O&M version, so that will be the first rating system we will release, followed closely by our building design and construction. So LEED version 4 has been out in the market since 2013, and we've seen a significant amount of market transformation in those 4 years, even as it was out in parallel with LEED 2009. As Melissa said, we've really advanced the conversation around materials. EPDs are a great example. Energy, so the energy targets we were discussing back in 2009, 2010 for V4 were scary to a lot of folks. Now that's not a problem at all. Also some single credits that were new in version 4, envelope commissioning, demand response. Those ideas are really starting to get some traction and gain some momentum. So we've seen significant market transformation already, and we're quite pleased, even with the small number of certified projects, with the success that we've had in transforming that market. But there are a few areas that we haven't seen that transformation yet, and that leads us to the first goal of LEED version 4.1. Really address those market barriers that we've seen in LEED version 4, and learn those lessons from the project teams that are using it. So this is one of my favorite slides, creative tension. I'm sure you've all seen this if you've been to a LEED presentation. This really defines my job fairly well, trying to balance the needs of the market with the environment. It really defines all of our committees' work as well, trying to draw that fine line. I'm sure this defines a lot of your work as well, really trying to balance these two needs. But with LEED version 4, we're seeing some areas that were slightly out of balance. If we make the rating system too easy in some areas, we see that the market can readily adopt it, but it won't necessarily give us that environmental solution that we looked for. If we make the rating system too hard, the market can't adopt certain credits, and we also don't see that transformative power. So we really do need to balance the abilities of the market with the urgency of environmental solutions throughout the whole rating system to make sure that we are as transformative as we can possibly be. And with LEED version 4, there are certainly some areas that we can improve. So one thing that's really valuable for us to look at is the credit achievement data for version 4. Like I said, we have a limited amount of projects that have certified. We're around 400 or 500 projects that have certified. but we are starting to see some trends. And as you can see here, in red, we've outlined some of the credits that are seeing low achievement rates. So that can be for a number of reasons. That can be because there's a market barrier in the rating system. We made something too hard. The market hasn't adapted yet to our requirements. It could be because there's a cost barrier. It could be because a certain credit isn't popular. So one task, one exercise for us in the version 4.1 process will be to go through the rating system, identify where those low achievement areas are, and start to explore why that's the case and see if we can come up with some solutions. So just a few examples of credits that we'll be exploring in LEED version 4.1. As we've talked about, the materials category saw a lot of change in version 4, and that has been slow to absorb into the market. One area, the LCA credit, the Building Lifecycle Impact Reduction Credit. LCA was new to LEED. We've seen many projects try LCA within version 4. We haven't quite seen the uptake that we want. We know that's going to be slow. But we also know that we need to be adding more guidance and helping more projects along with LCA. So one area in version 4.1 that we'll be addressing is making the LCA process a little more clear. Also, continuing in the materials category, EPDs. Like we've said, we've seen tremendous momentum around EPDs, but we're still not quite there. And a couple of our options, particularly option 2, has set a very high bar in terms of the 50% threshold. So that's definitely an area we'll explore, also trying to clarify the credit language in this EPD credit. Sourcing of raw materials is another one. The option 2 of this credit retains some of the LEED version 4 single attribute criteria. That has been heavily achieved, well achieved by projects in version 4. Where we really need to spend some time is in option 1 and trying to understand how we can develop frameworks for manufacturers to disclose their sourcing practices. And then lastly, the material ingredients credit in the materials category can also be under scrutiny for version 4.1 to try to figure out how we can start to kickstart some of that transformation around disclosing material ingredients. So a few other credits that we will be exploring for market barriers. Rainwater, we know that's a really important credit within the LEED rating system and has been for a long time. We do see it as a credit that has low achievement. Trying to understand why that's the case will be our task. We think that that could be improved through improving the calculations, streamlining some of the credit requirements. So that's on the list as well. And then moving on to EQ, low-emitting materials. This credit saw a significant amount of change since version 2009. And it's an incredibly accurate credit, but it does require a lot of calculations and understanding of the testing methods that go behind this credit. So this is a credit that's ripe for streamlining in version 4.1. As well as indoor air quality assessment. The feedback we're getting for option 2 of this credit, which is the testing option, is that the list of compounds to test for is a little long. It's providing a cost barrier. It's a bit expensive to test. So that's a credit our technical advisory group is already looking at, and for version 4.1, we expect to see an update. And then lastly, 2 more credits, daylighting. That's a credit that we can always improve and we'll look at for version 4.1, as well as acoustics. So this is a credit that we're happy to see included in version 4. However, we know that it does have a low achievement rate for a number of reasons. This might be a costly credit. It's not a credit that appeals to many owners. So there might be other reasons for its low achievement, but it also is ripe for potential streamlining in version 4.1. All right, so version 4 has also been out in the market for 4 years, as I said. That's a long time. Version 2009 was out in the market for 4 years when we launched version 4. So for any rating system that's been out in the market for 4 years, we do need to take a look and update it to make sure it is still a relevant rating system. So our second goal for version 4.1 is really to ensure that this rating system remains the global leader in green building and updating those performance requirements where possible. And as I mentioned, energy is a prime example here. We do need to continually raise the bar on energy. Climate change is our #1 priority, so that's something we'll be looking at for version 4.1 as well. How can we continually raise the bar on energy and drive towards toward our system goals? Also, some other credits that might need reference standards updated. Construction activity pollution prevention has a new standard that's out. Indoor water use is referencing many process water baselines that could also be looked at, and process water baselines could be added to this credit. That was new in version 4, and we would like to take another look in version 4.1. And then lastly, if we do have any successful pilot credits that we've been using in the market, we would like to take this opportunity to include those within version 4.1. So one that we're really excited about is the alternative energy metric pilot credit, which allows projects to use various energy metrics in addition to energy cost to evaluate their energy performance. So that's something we think is, this is the right time to be looking at changing that energy metric in LEED version 4.1 and incorporating some of the lessons we've learned from this pilot credit. And then the other pilot credit that we've seen a lot of interest in is the whole project water use reduction pilot credit. This essentially allows projects that have significant water use, significant process water use, to take credit for those savings by showing a whole project water use reduction. We'd like to incorporate that in some way as well. So the third goal of version 4.1, to expand the marketplace for LEED. So this was a goal within version 4. We really wanted to add compliance paths. We wanted to start to look at the international market more closely. LEED version 4 was the first rating system that we did consider the international implications of all of our requirements. In version 4.1, we're also learning lessons about from users in terms of what requirements should be added and what additional standards are important to be included. So we do want to keep an eye on expanding that market and providing as many relevant compliance paths as we can to make LEED work everywhere. One credit that has been successful in some areas and hasn't been successful in others, especially internationally, has been demand response. So some areas, some regions of the world just don't have demand response programs and probably won't get them anytime soon. So how can we adapt this credit to make it work to still meet the intent of improving our grid in version 4.1? So that's something we'll look at. Green power and carbon offsets. This has also been a little bit of a struggle to apply internationally, finding those international standards that can be applied to this credit. So we will spend some time comparing Green E to other standards and hopefully including other compliance paths globally. Sensitive land protection, this is a good example of a requirement that is hard to apply internationally. Prime farmland, for example, doesn't necessarily have an equivalence everywhere around the globe. So how can we craft this requirement to make sure that it works in all regions that LEED is used? And then lastly, indoor water use reduction. We do see problems applying the water baselines outside of the US as well. We've addressed that in a couple different ways. I think we can do a more comprehensive job with version 4.1. So in addition to expanding the marketplace for LEED, we also do want to take the opportunity of LEED version 4.1 to try to align our requirements with some of the other rating systems that have come along since version 4 was developed. PEER is one. So how can we align some of our energy requirements with some of the requirements in PEER? The same with WELL. So how can we start to connect LEED and align the metrics and requirements in LEED with WELL so that it's a more streamlined process for projects that would like to pursue both? And then lastly, the sites initiative. How can we start to align those requirements in our sites category with the Sustainable Sites Initiative? So the last and most important goal of LEED version 4.1 is really to improve the performance of buildings and to really, as Melissa said, give owners the key metrics that they're looking for. So one way we are doing that, we would like to align all of our metrics across all of our rating systems. We would like to focus those metrics and use the ARC platform as the organizing platform for how we can start to drive performance on an ongoing basis. So recertification has always been a challenge for us. We think that if we can continue to align all of those metrics, focus just on the key performance metrics, and then use ARC to facilitate that process, that ongoing performance reporting will be easier for projects, and we'll see more projects coming back for ongoing certification. So a couple other areas in LEED version 4.1 that we'll be addressing. Residential. So we've gotten a lot of feedback about the residential requirements in LEED, some confusion over residential projects not knowing what rating systems they're eligible for, what requirements apply to them, because we have a mid-rise program, a low-rise program, we have a new construction program that addresses high-rise projects. So in LEED version 4.1, we'll be consolidating all of our residential requirements into one rating system called LEED Residential, which we think will make the process much more streamlined for any residential project. We'll also be updating our single-family homes program along the same lines and the same goals as all of our other 4.1 projects. Neighborhood development as well. We'll see some activity in 4.1, especially with the introduction of LEED for cities and communities. We want to make sure that we can streamline LEED ND and make sure that it's connected to the goals in LEED for communities and LEED for cities. And then lastly, the rating system that will see the most amount of change in LEED version 4.1 is our O&M rating system. So it's been in our strategic plan for the last few years, USGBC's strategic plan, to expand the existing buildings marketplace. Since LEED was launched many years ago, we haven't really seen that growth that we've always hoped for. So we're going to take this opportunity with LEED version 4.1 to do that, to streamline this rating system and really evolve it to be that performance-based, data-driven rating system that we think can be scaled a little better and used by more projects out there. So one way that we'll be doing that is by looking at the prerequisites and understanding if there are any market barriers within those prerequisites. So adjusting those prerequisites where necessary. So energy has always been an issue, as well as ventilation. We'll take a look at those and adjust where necessary. Another way that we'll be doing this, integrating ARC into the rating system and integrating those performance scores, trying to streamline the rating system, reduce documentation, and ARC can be very helpful to help streamline that whole process and align our requirements across all of our rating systems. And then lastly, we do want to explore applying O&M to interior spaces. So traditionally, O&M has been a whole building rating system. How can we apply O&M to interior spaces as well? So that's something we'll look at for version 4.1. All right, so now I'd like to turn it over to Megan Sparks to explain a little bit more about how ARC can start to improve performance throughout LEED.
Hi, everyone. So I'm here to talk about how ARC fits into all of this. So Corey has talked about all of the key points for LEED version 4.1. Addressing market barriers, updating performance requirements, expanding the marketplace, and improving performance and rewarding leaders. So I'm going to focus on this last point, improving performance and rewarding leaders. As Corey has described, and what we're very familiar with, LEED has always and will continue to provide the strategies that you need in order to improve performance. But in addition to this, the shift that we're making with LEED version 4.1 is making performance a part of the requirements. LEED version 4.1 certification will recognize leaders based on their performance, not just whether the strategies have been implemented. And this is where ARC comes in. Because as you've heard over the course of this last year, and no doubt have heard over the course of this conference, ARC is the platform for measuring and evaluating performance. So let's take a closer look at what performance means and how LEED and ARC fit together. LEED has always been a really effective tool in providing the playbook for how to design, build, and operate your building in the most sustainable way possible. LEED provides you with the strategies and the toolkit that you need to be successful. But what we really started thinking about over 10 years ago is how do you go from strategies to outcomes? For example, how do you know whether your daylighting strategies really make your occupants more productive? How do you know whether your commissioning activities lower your carbon emissions? How do you know whether your low-flow fixtures really decrease your water usage? We knew that the only way to push the market further, hold people accountable for their actions, and make the leap to net zero was to increase transparency in the marketplace. In order to know whether the strategies being implemented were having the intended outcomes, we needed the data to prove it, to prove that when you design, build, and operate a building to LEED standards, it is irrefutably more sustainable than a non-LEED building. In order to do this, we needed three things. One, to collect and share data. Two, to evaluate and compare that data. And three, reward high performers. So the first piece that we implemented on this path to transparency was collecting and sharing data. That's why, in 2009, we introduced the minimum program requirements, namely Minimum Program Requirement 6, that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. That means projects must submit and share data on energy and water usage after certification. And this carried over to the prerequisites in LEED version 4. And this provided the basis for us to start building the baselines that we needed to start evaluating performance and establishing the habit of tracking and reporting data. ARC serves as the platform for reporting, benchmarking, and sharing this data. And LEED registered and certified projects have access to ARC for tracking and reporting this data. Second, we needed a way to compare and evaluate that data, and this is where the performance score comes in. Using the data that we've collected from the 62,000 buildings that have achieved LEED certification and the hundreds of thousands of others that are pursuing LEED certification, we've created a unique way to take a simple set of important data that you provide, run that through an algorithm, and generate a 0 to 100 score that tells you how you're performing. ARC is the platform that powers this performance score. And it's easy to understand because it's based on a scale that you're already familiar with. A score of 40 means you're performing at the LEED certified level. 50 is silver, 60 is gold, 80 or above is platinum, and a perfect score of 100 means you're at net zero emissions. For LEED, ARC generates a score in energy, water, waste, transportation, and human experience, and combines each of these category scores into an overall performance score that tells you how you're performing in sustainability. So let's talk a little bit about how this performance score works and what it tells you. So put in simple terms, the performance score tells you how you perform compared to other similar buildings. So for example, a mid-sized office building will show how you compare to other mid-sized office buildings, and a warehouse distribution center will be compared to other similar warehouse distribution centers. This like-to-like comparison is done based on various characteristics of the project, such as size, occupancy, emissions, and location. Based on these characteristics, projects are assigned a comparison reference set of buildings that serves as the baseline for benchmarking. Now, let's take a closer look at how a score is calculated, and we'll use energy as an example. As I mentioned, ARC assigns your building a reference set of other similar buildings. Next, you provide whole building energy usage data, which you can get from your monthly utility bills. Then, ARC takes that data and uses your energy usage to convert it to equivalent carbon emissions. And we use the Energy Star Portfolio Manager technical paper to determine emissions based on the amount of energy used and the fuel source. ARC then adjusts those carbon emissions for fluctuations in outside air temperature and operating hours that occurred over that time frame that you reported. You'll then receive a score reflecting how your buildings adjusted carbon emissions compared to those other buildings in your reference set, or a score that tells you how you're performing in the energy category. So how does this all tie in with LEED? Well, the energy score tells you how your building is performing in energy. It's a way of taking all of the strategies that you've implemented that are meant to improve your energy efficiency and reduce your carbon emissions, and tells you whether or not they're actually working. So for example, LEED version 4 includes several credits related to commissioning: existing building commissioning analysis, existing building commissioning implementation, and finally, ongoing commissioning. Each of these credits involves implementing a strategy in your building and completing a set of prescribed activities. But the only way that you know whether or not these activities are actually working, whether they've been successful, whether you've implemented them effectively and correctly, is whether or not they improve your energy efficiency and ultimately reduce your carbon emissions. So if you have a high energy score, it's a sign that you've implemented green building best practices consistently and efficiently, and we want to award you for that. And most of the credits in LEED version 4 map to a performance indicator. So let's take a look. On the left are all of the credits and prerequisites included in LEED version 4 O&M. Trust me, they're all there. On the right are the performance categories in ARC. And here's how those strategies map to transportation, water performance, energy performance, waste performance, and finally, human experience performance. And those credits that don't map to an indicator consist of the base points. And this is how we move from strategies to outcomes. Which brings us to our third point on the path to transparency: rewarding leaders based on their performance. And this is what LEED version 4.1 is. LEED version 4.1 moves the bar from strategies to outcomes, and then rewards high performers based on their demonstrated performance. So LEED and ARC are intimately connected. ARC is the platform for tracking, reporting, and measuring data, and powers the LEED performance score that's used to evaluate performance. And LEED version 4.1 serves as the toolkit for improving your score and rewarding high performers. So with that, I'll pass it over to Brendan Owens, and he has asked me to introduce him this way. Brendan Owens is now going to talk about salad.
Thanks. Oh, thank you. Hi, guys. All right, so we are an hour in. Nice job, everybody. We were trying to definitely make sure that we got through this faster than the 2 hours that we have allotted, because we're obviously between you guys and the bar, and we wanted to keep that in mind. But while we're here, let me take a moment during this transition. Everyone wants to get up and stretch. Sitting for an hour is bad for you, so let's get moving a little bit. Right on. Okay. I am going to talk about salad. Actually, I'm gonna try to tell you guys a story about my backyard garden, our backyard garden. So we have a garden that we do every year in our backyard, and I guess I build all of the squirrel discouragement apparatuses that are necessary in cities, gardening, right? Because we have very crafty, diabolical squirrels. And my wife Wendy does most of the actual gardening. But it's a team effort, and the reason I'm bringing this up is because our best thing that we grew this year was kale. We had a great crop. We still have plants that are giving us harvestable leaves and delicious November kale. It's wonderful. And we had this kale all through a pretty hot summer, too. We've got this crepe myrtle that grows in our backyard that shades the kale during the hottest part of the summer, like this magical integrative design tree of kale giving life. And our kale was so good this summer that it was the best we've ever had. But the problem that we had was that we had sort of a downside to it. We had these white flies. Does anybody know these guys? Right? Yeah. Oh, that's a heartbreaking sound out there. We had these white flies that we had just a literal infestation of these, and they don't eat the kale. Well, they didn't eat our kale. I don't know what they do to your kale if you have them or whatever else they're growing on. What they do is they lay eggs on the undersides of your leaves, right? So they attach their little eggs to the undersides of your leaves, and they just, that's it. That's all they did. So the challenge is that it's not really that big a deal, but you have to wash the kale really, really well in order to get the leaves off. And I did that because my kids love kale, which is a parenting win, right? So we wash the kale and we feed it to them. And as I was doing this, as I was midway through this washing of the kale to get rid of the eggs, it occurred to me as I was doing this, standing at my sink, that the water that I was using to get rid of the eggs that were on the back of the kale was in some way a compensation mechanism, was an actual compensation mechanism for the fact that we didn't choose to use any pesticides in our garden, right? So instead of using a chemical with a problematic human or environmental health profile, we end up washing all the kale, which is something that got my wheels turning in a weird way, because I'm standing there wondering whether the water that I am using to wash the kale and the embodied carbon and the energy associated with all the stuff that happens when all the energy that's bound up in the carbon and the pollutants that are bound up in water, in terms of getting it to you and then treating it once you're done with it. I'm trying to figure out whether or not it's better for me to wash the kale or if I just go out and use a pesticide, right? So at the same time, in the other part of the back of my head, I was simultaneously trying to triangulate whether or not it would be better for me to go buy kale from the farmer's market, from a gardener who knows what he or she is doing and doesn't have to use pesticides to get rid of whiteflies, right? But then they have to truck their kale to the farmer's market, and there's a whole other value chain of what's going on, right? So these three scenarios are running through my head, right? No pesticides, but lots of water. A lot less water, but a little bit of pesticides, and organic from the farmer's market. And it has, this triangulation has so many endpoints. It has so many interconnections and so many trade-offs that it's really impossible to do a full accounting standing in front of your sink while you're trying to get the eggs off the kale. I actually went through and I did some research on the protein content, which is the research paper that you see down there, because, the kids might not notice if I left a couple of the eggs on there, right? The extra crunch. Dad, what's that? And then what about the squirrels, right? What are all these squirrels eating because I've turned my garden into this kale Fort Knox, right? So I'm going to come back to the point of this story in a second, but this is also the reason that I always try to bring reusable bags to the grocery store, is because when the person who's helping me check out looks at me and says, would you like paper or plastic? It's like I'm deer in the headlights. I'm like running through. It's like they asked me to do the square root of 286,000, right? I'm going to come back to what I hope is the point of that story in a second. Most of us are here today for a lot of the same reasons. We understand the situation that our species has created for itself, and whether it's climate change or whether it's any of the other many types of environmental pollution that we are responsible for, whether it's endangered species or biodiversity or any of the social equity challenges that are all bound up in those knotty issues. We understand the dire circumstances that we have created for ourselves, and we want to do better. That's what compels us to come here, right? And the thing that makes this audience unique, the thing that makes green building unique, is that it's organized around a set of actions that you guys are taking in the face of this daunting and demoralizing amount of evidence that really does support the people who have already thrown up their hands and say, all right, we're cooked, right? We're done, right? But that's not what you guys do. You guys go out and you build stuff and you fix stuff. And this drive and this creativity and all the things that spring from it, for many of us, it's this galvanizing force behind how we decide to commit to the days like we get to spend together over the course of this week, right? We don't give up our time with our families. We don't give up our time with our bikes or our friends or our pets or our museums or our gardens or our damn flies in order to simply tinker at the edges. We want to get in the mix, right? We want to make these sacrifices, and we want to make them count. So collectively as a movement, I think it's important to understand that the benefits that accrue for all the things that we do, that you guys do out there, are real, and they're real for us in very, very, sometimes very tangible ways, but sometimes very, very difficult ways to actually put your hands on. But they're real, and that's what actually ends up driving us that much harder, right? And this, in many ways, is what attracted me to LEED in the first place. So I got out of university and stepped into a buildings industry that was not prepared to do anything about climate change, right? We were sort of, right? We weren't prepared to do anything about problematic chemistries and building materials that we were using. It was starting, but this wasn't something that I got out of university. So seeing this thing, this beacon, this program that was created by this tiny little organization was immediately compelling. This was something I wanted to be a part of. And while we still have a lot of work left to do, and I would argue over and over again, I will argue over and over again this week, that we have more work ahead of us than we have behind us, it's really been a privilege to be a part of this. And working with Melissa and Wes and Megan and Corey is a great part of being able to be in the mix here. However, as much as I love LEED and as much as I love all of you, my green building family, I have been spending a bunch of time over the past couple of years with other industries where the spark that jump-started the global green movement, the global green building movement that Rick and Mike and David struck in 1993 has yet to be realized. And it's been eye-opening, it really has. It's been equally fascinating and confusing, and some of it's been fun in a sort of rating system geek sense of the way you think about those things. But the reason I'm talking about the past a little bit is because the feeling that I keep coming back to over and over and over again as I engage with these other industries is one of that can be better probably described as nostalgia, because it reminds me in very, very direct ways about the early days of USGBC and LEED. So the days that when the entire staff of the organization could huddle around one table in the front of the bar around the corner, right? There was a time in my career at USGBC when I could name every single LEED project. Right? I knew them all. And that's the feeling that I'm getting in working across these other market sectors, because that's what's happening in these other places, right? So the people who have the same type of drive and the commitment and the inspiration, they're every bit as committed to transformation of their industry as you guys have been and continue to be in yours. We've gotten the opportunity, USGBC, GBCI, we've gotten the opportunity to work with these organizations and to work on these transformations by sharing our experiences, by saying this is what worked in buildings, this is what worked in LEED, this is what didn't work in LEED. And as a result of all of that, we've been essentially helping them to try to replicate the movement that you guys are responsible for. You probably heard a lot of people talk about several of these programs. The programs like Peer or True or ParkSmart or Sites, and all these tools are the fruit of those engagements that we've been having collectively across USGBC and GBCI. And it might admittedly seem like a bit of a disorganized, haphazard bunch of seeds that USGBC has been planting at 2101L for the last couple of years. But you heard Wes talk about development of a model green building code, and there might be a question in the back of your mind wondering whether if there's a strategy, any kind of grand plan, or is this just let popcorn pop and it's going to be that's the way it is. You might be annoyed by all the noise. I mean, rating system fatigue is a real thing. I probably wouldn't blame you for that. But you're still here, so I'd like to spend a few minutes that we have left together, or at least the ones you stick around for. You could probably leave and get your CEUs at this point. Explaining the madness behind the method a bit. And for me, ideas around a grand plan start with this great quote from Amory Lovin. I think it sums it up rather nicely. I really do love this thought, right? It's provocative and it's humbling in many ways. I think this is a good place to start because Amory is describing in ways almost too numerous to count the unfortunate story of our built environment. So let's talk about this, unpack this a little bit. How many of you think you really understand the electricity industry, the generation, transmission, and distribution industry? Not one hand. Nice job. Or what happens to water after you brush your teeth? A few more hands, not bad, good job. I think, it's not, glib to say that electricity comes out of the hole and water goes down the hole, right? I'm not trying to call anybody out here. This is not a criticism, because as an industry, we're not alone in our focus on our piece of this crazy complicated puzzle, right? So I've had conversations with electricity distribution engineers who seem to think that buildings, these things that we stand in and live in, are just these resistors on the other side of the energy meter into which they dump energy and extract cash, right? That's the transactional nature, right? I've had conversations with wastewater treatment plant operators who are really lamenting the rise of municipal composting because it starves their sewage flow of organic content, which is necessary to run the biological processes that run in their wastewater treatment plants, right? So, and I'm not throwing rocks at people on the other sides of the industry either. When we were having conversations about how we were going to talk about this idea with you guys today, a couple of weeks ago and in the past week, one of the people who was really a long-time stalwart volunteer for USGBC and somebody I really love was basically saying, look, we don't have time for all of these things, right? I'm an MEP engineer, just let me do my job. Get out of the way, let me do my job. Our industry silos are the unintended consequences of technical specialization that is itself the byproduct of mind-boggling complexity, right? We don't, just flash back to me standing at my sink trying to figure out whether or not I was doing more harm than good, because seriously, I don't know what the squirrels are eating, right? But I know that they're not eating my kale, but is that necessarily a net positive thing? Maybe they're off eating something else that's endangered, right? So these complications, and I'm hugely sympathetic to the concern raised by this person who I consider a real friend, because we can't possibly expect everybody to be a subject matter expert on all of these things simultaneously. There's just too much information, right? Being competent in one thing is a huge endeavor, right? Being a true expert in anything, basically, is a lifelong journey, right? So when you try to mix in buildings plus power plus mobility plus materials, all these things coming together, it's insanely complicated, and it feels just, it feels like everything is just the tip of the iceberg. You're not necessarily going to be able to drive at any of these types of changes. So as a result, one of the things that's happened to our industry, right, this built environment industry, as we've become more and more specialized, is we become the butt of Amory's little joke right here, right? So by way of example of the non-vegetable variety, let's talk about building load and peak load factor in specifically, right? So here's a typical electric load profile of a building over the course of a 24-hour period in July in Washington, D.C., right? So you have demand on the power, instantaneous demand on the y-axis, time on the x. And for those of you who don't know DC, in July, we have a pretty challenging climate. It's hot, it's humid. Congress is in session a lot. And so these buildings need lots of cooling, right? And this building is a typical example of a building because there are lots and lots of buildings like this in the Washington, D.C. area. Right? And it's not that problematic when you look at this, right? Between the hours of, right? But things get complicated when you take one building and turn it into 1,000 buildings, because kilowatts become megawatts, and then you start to realize that during this 3-hour period of time, the peak load in these buildings is essentially double, right? So it's 128 megawatts versus 59 megawatts average for the day. And the load on the electrical grid, right, the thing that the power generation, transmission, and distribution, the other side of the energy meter, the thing that they have to do is build all of their generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure to satisfy this couple-hour period during the day. Each of these buildings, each of these 1,000 buildings might be individually a pretty efficient building, but because we have not paid as good attention as we need to the impacts of what happens when lots of peaky buildings get together and do their peaky building thing, the distribution infrastructure is massively oversized as a result. We haven't designed this building system to work with the power system, so they tend to work against one another, right? And this is what happens. We get 2 times as much generation, transmission, and distribution capacity needed for 180 hours a year, and it sits idle for another 8,580 hours in the year. Right? This is a big problem. This is essentially running billions of dollars of asset as frequently as most people who have a bread machine use it, right? Is this really as optimized as we should be striving for? Is this the best we can do? I'd hope you might agree that it's not, and we should maybe be tinkering about and thinking what we can do to do about it. One of the things that we have done is introduce a credit for demand response in LEED v4. This credit largely exists because we were starting to understand this when we were going through the process, and we've gotten better at understanding this as we've gone through the process of developing v4 and watching the implementation and engaging with these other industries. And demand response is a great strategy for peaky buildings because it gives the grid operators another tool to use in their toolbox rather than just building more generation and building bigger pipes to put the wire through, put all the electricity through. But demand response doesn't fix all the issues that we care about, right? To truly fix this problem, we need to completely integrate the design, construction, operations, and maintenance of both the buildings and the way that we run them and the way that we generate the electricity that supplies them, right? So then we can run the system and the job's done. The joke's on Amory now. We fixed all the problems. But let's talk about how realistic that is, that vision of completely reinventing wholly different regulatory infrastructures in very different industries. We have to retrain everybody much more collaborative. I guess that's conceivable. I mean, we have the benefit of 2 industries, one that has been for the past, since its inception, dedicated to selling as much electricity as it can, and the other trying to do the exact opposite thing. Seems like that's going to be a no-friction affair all around, right? And if we do continue to allow ourselves to suspend the reality and get this thought exercise completed, then we have to talk about people in the buildings needing to wash their hands after they've flushed, right? Flushing is a complicated series of dominoes, right? Water's conveyed through the building's internal plumbing to a sanitary sewer. From there, it might go to a centralized pumping station. Pumping station conveys it to a wastewater treatment plant. When it's not raining in a city with a combined sewer, that knocks over a different set of dominoes. The sewage enters a very energy-intensive process to remove physical, biological, and chemical pollutants before it's disinfected and reintroduced into a receiving water body, right? So here's the fun part. Treating sewage takes a lot of energy, right? So if we don't coordinate the places and the times when we're doing all of our flushing, we could potentially reintroduce the demand and peak problem in our buildings just in a different sector, right? So we're not having a peak load factor problem in buildings anymore. We've shifted it over to the wastewater treatment plant. So this is what happens when combined sewers come into the mix. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to go through that. That's a little bit too much of a detail. But so far, we've explored vegetables, just one, and the interconnections between power, buildings, and one part of half of the water equation, right? We haven't talked about how the people who needed to flush got to the places where they were going to flush in the first place, right? We didn't talk about what they ate and drank, except for the kale, that made them have to flush, and we have said absolutely nothing about all the shit we buy from Amazon, right? So this list of interactions goes on and on and on, and I mentioned earlier that it's not a criticism, right? This is complicated stuff, right? It's all connected. There's no end to the road. And it's fun to drink a couple of beers and think about this stuff, but so far, no amount of beer, so far, has made the interconnections any less complicated. It's the biggest game of whack-a-mole ever conceived. It's all connected. All of it is connected. So that's the context out of which the concept I'm about to talk through emerges. In the short term, breaking down the silos between industries responsible for creating our built environment seems rather quixotic, right? We talked about that already. How can we integrate the power in the building sector? They're two different things, right? But that's not necessarily the end of the road here. So we all know it's hard enough to get architects and engineers working on the same building project to collaborate, truly collaborate. But does that mean we can't make it better? So this is where we started, right? So we went back to Amory, and because he's been doing it to us for so many years, we turned him on his head. So this is upside down Amory 11s, right? And we changed his quote around. If they are designed to work with one another, then they tend to work with one another. I looked for a picture of Amory where his mustache upside down wasn't pretty hilarious. I couldn't find one. I love this man, but upside down, his mustache makes me giggle. And from this quote and from this concept, we started searching for an organizing principle that would allow us to organize all of the mind-bogglingly complex systems with this seemingly unknowable number of interactions. And that's a big buildup for something that I think you're going to be super unimpressed with how far we ended up looking, because this is our concept, right? So if you're not already checking your email, can somebody pull out your phone and just type in a browser window, how many apps for me, please? And I'm going to promise to buy a beer for the first person to shout out an answer that's close. How many apps are there? 2.3 million, that's a good one, right? That's just in the iPhone world. Android has a few more. Also, beer for anybody who holds up a flip phone. Come on, be honest. All right. So there's about 2.2 million. Right on. All right, winner. All right. There's another 2.8 in the Android operating system, so that's 5 million across both platforms. I mean, even BlackBerry has 235,000. I'm only picking on Canada because you guys have Trudeau now. I never would have given you a hard time during the Harper years. Anyway, all of these apps coexist in their ecosystems, and everybody gets to maybe not benefit from all of them. Some of them are garbage, right? But there is some use for these things and they all interact and they all sort of reside on the same platform. So we ended up looking as far as our pockets, right? Because this is about as far as we needed to look for a solution that seemed like it might work. And we started thinking about rating systems as apps. And our job was as the designer of these apps, and we were tasked with the strategy and the challenge of making these things all work behind the scenes together. Because people who love Candy Crush don't really need to know that it operates on the same e-commerce platform as Farmville and Angry Birds, right? It just does that stuff all behind the scenes. Nobody really needs to know about that. And we didn't necessarily think we needed to burden the people who were in our silos with the vastness of the interconnectedness of every single decision they make on every single project, and I'll just have them understand the real world complexities that account for all this interconnectedness. If we could build them an app ecosystem that allowed them to be able to just rely on the fact that the decisions were baked into the decisions that we were rewarding action around. And the result is a system of systems that lets an architect designing a school, for example, confidently make a decision that doesn't screw up other parts of the system that the school plugs into, right? And maximizes the number of places where positive synergy between all of these interconnecting systems produces outcomes where the whole is more than just the sum of the parts. In other words, let's see if this works. We want to make sure that all the candy that we crush up is not gumming up our slingshots that we're shooting birds with, because that's bad. But we want to make sure that the pigs in Farmville get to eat all the candy to the extent that we want that to happen. I don't actually know that much about Farmville. but I'm assuming that that's a good thing, right? So this is the thing that's going on, right? And this is functionally our idea in a nutshell, because the reality is that we've been building the infrastructure that makes this possible since we stood GBCI up in 2008, right? So the things that give us the platform around which we can make sure that we're not making it worse and that we're taking advantage of the places where synergy exists is the crux of what's going on here. Right, so these are the first apps in our ecosystem and the place that we're trying to leverage GBCI's certification and credentialing infrastructure, because that solves what I'll tell you is probably the biggest challenge in scaling market transformation programs. It's not about writing the rating system. What Corey and I have done at USGBC with development of the LEED rating system, and Megan and Melissa and all the rest of the team and all the tags, that's the easy part. Scaling these infrastructures to make sure that you can support the amount of action that's happening is the hard part, right? And so GBCI solves that for a lot of these systems, for all of these systems. And the concept gives us a platform to organize technical expertise from various sectors of the industry and partner with the organizations and stakeholders who are the thought leaders that you guys are for the buildings industry in their spaces, right? So at the same time we are doing all this interconnection, we're empowering these stakeholders and activists with a program that galvanizes their movement and provides the same agency and license to operate that LEED has provided to the buildings industry over the last 17, 18 years. And Corey talked about the work that's been done to integrate some sites and well concepts into the 4.1. We've also done that with peer, so we're integrating some peer stuff into the LEED rating system for the 4.1. But we're also doing it the opposite way, right? So we're taking peer, which is the second version will launch, V2 will launch in the first quarter of 2018. And it's a place where the integration and interoperability strategy is being implemented. So I want to talk about how that's happening, because what we've done with peer V2 is that we've introduced a demand response credit that credits power supply with giving incentive to projects that are going through and meeting the LEED credit, right? So we're trying to marry these two things together. So the thing that we give peer projects for a credit for around demand response mirrors what we're giving buildings credit for on the demand response side, right? And I think that's one sort of simple example of how this type of synergy and strategy will evolve over time. So the other thing that's relatively obvious as you go through and look at all the interconnection is that we don't have a complete set of tools in the ecosystem yet, that our environment's incomplete if we really want to address the full scope of USGBC's mission. So when we look at this, all of these interconnections. So if you think about cities as being made up of these industries, we need solutions for water and wastewater and mobility in a couple of different forms, basically all the forms of infrastructure around which industries have been established. So there's lots more partnership that led us to all the things that we currently have on the horizon. The organizing principle is designed to simplify these system-to-system interactions. It gives us a head start on prioritization, structure, reduces the redundancy, and leverages the ARC platform for data transparency and performance tracking. So I talked earlier about how GBCI's infrastructure was being leveraged. We also have the ability to leverage ARC because ARC becomes the connective tissue for all the data that flows into and out of these programs. It provides infrastructure to manage the data and performance verification, because that's vital to making sure that the things that we're designing these systems to accomplish actually get accomplished and are verified. I'm hoping that a lot of you got a chance to engage in a LEED for Cities session today, or over the course of the rest of the week, because the cities program is a really sort of top-down, or in this case, for you guys, left side, approach to cities, but we're coming at this from the opposite direction as well with all of these industry sector-specific programs. And the challenge is making sure that we are aligning these things that are coming up from the bottom or coming up across from the right with the things that are happening in LEED for Cities. So this is another aspect of making sure that the connection point, the things that LEED for Cities is measuring, and the thing that these rating systems are providing industry sectors with reward for acting around moves us forward. Wes talked about regulation and coming back to look at those things. Instead of talking about the interconnections between all the alphabet soup that's responsible for the development of Standard 189 and the IGCC and the connections that has to LEED and programs like Cal Green, we're looking at different regulatory agencies, right? So we're looking at NERC and FERC and NARUC, and we're putting those in those boxes, and we're just basically spanning these out across all the different programs that are there. So this is another mechanism where the regulatory frameworks and regulatory strategies that we've engaged in over the years are being ported down into the way that we're engaging in connecting our leadership in these other market sectors with regulatory infrastructures in their worlds as well. So regulation to leadership across the spectrum of things that make up the built environment. And one way to look at this is that we're 20 years in, right? And we're just getting warmed up. And we're not alone in doing this, but the history of this organization, the history of the people that are responsible for creating this change leads me to believe that USGBC and GBCI are the right set of organizations to convene this effort and really push it forward in partnership and collaboration with the other parts of the people that are working in the other sectors of the built environment that we're all dependent on and interconnected with. So I spent some time talking about the disconnectedness of our industry and the challenges that creates as we do our jobs, and a bit of time talking about the structure, maybe more time than you were interested in talking about the structure. But I would like to spend the last couple of moments that we have together talking about our evolving understanding of the reasons that we build these rating systems and tools to begin with, right? So it's why we do this work, right? So the heart or the brain or the lungs, we're working with Janine Benyus on the metaphor. It'll probably be some kind of cool mushroom metaphor that we get to use. And with the launch of LEED v4, this set of system goals was owned by the organization for the first time. It defined the things that we wanted a LEED project to be good at. And the prioritization process that we used was intended to focus project teams on strategies that delivered outcomes that are in line with the goals that we established. If you're not familiar with these goals, Rianne's in the back there, just give her your LEED AP credential on the way out the door. But the thing that we started to realize is that the scope of what we're looking at becomes broader, and as the number of organizations that we engage in partnerships around with becomes bigger, and it comes more into focus, and we understand that if we really want to get to a complete solution, an integrated solution for all the sectors of the built environment, this framework starts to fray the broader you pull out, and that's a problem for implementing the strategy. So we also spent some time trying to figure out how we could create a more complete set of things that we were trying to build these systems to accomplish. And we didn't really look that far either, because in 2013, in 2015, a couple of years after we launched LEED v4, 190 nations ratified the UN Sustainable Development Goals. This isn't new to not a lot of people. Has anybody never seen the UN SDGs? All right, that's great. Because this becomes, these are the things that the UN says define our built environment objectives for 2030. But it's a whole society thing that's going on with the SDGs. So these end up being a bit too broad for the scope of just the built environment. And by way of example, what I mean by that is building a LEED Platinum school in and of itself doesn't fix the social policy that might exist in a place that discourages sending girls to school, right? So we can put in the LEED rating system to be a certified project. We can put in a requirement for bathroom facilities that embrace all genders, right? But that's not going to change the policy, right? So we've been working on operationalizing the UN SDGs for use in support of this idea, this ecosystem of programs idea, as a way to make sure that we are putting our leverage and putting our effort into places that we can actually move the needle, right? So we're not turning our back on anything that the SDGs are trying to accomplish. We are really trying to make sure that we are focusing the effort that's going to happen as a result of all of these systems evolving into the market more directly and more efficiently. So our idea for a network of market transformation systems that are designed to virtuously reinforce each other, implemented by independent, coordinated group of stakeholders from all across the built environment to drive transformation inspired by this common set of sustainable development goals, right? That's what we're doing. And Amory had his way of saying what we're doing here, and we turned him upside down, and he got to say it our way. And Amory speaks to me. He's a physicist, and he regularly lectures engineers. This is John Muir, and he said it a slightly different way, and this is also something that I think looks good in terms of how we're thinking about these things. All right, so that's most of what I was planning on saying, but just to close it out, when I first got hooked back into USGBC in 2002, I was shocked by the lack of humility. I was sitting across the table from the guy who was interviewing me for a job, and I was really blown away by how audacious and arrogant and the way this guy spoke was, because it was this. The first question he asked me is, "Why do you want the most important job in the world?" Right? And I thought he was crazy, and I was loving every minute of it. And 15 years in the rearview mirror, the lack of humility that this guy, you guys are the result of that lack of humility in a lot of ways. You proved that he wasn't crazy. You proved that he was right to sort of view this opportunity, view this challenge that we were organizing at that point to move out on. You did it, right? We went forward and we did that. And I don't think it's necessarily bad to look back on those accomplishments, but it's also important that we keep our eye on the ball, right? Because I said it at the outset, we have more work ahead of us than we do behind us. And as we go deeper into buildings with LEED V41 and the ARC platform, we're also going out. We're also broadening the platform, making sure that the things that we're doing actually have the true benefit that we're hoping that they have, right? So I'm excited that LEED and the work that you guys have done is a launching pad for all the things that we need to bring to these other market sectors. Your work is a foundation for all of this other work, and it's something to be really proud of. I really do hope that in 5 or 10 years we're looking back on this time within the evolution of the green building movement, and we're feeling a sense of satisfaction that we were able to bring the DNA that this organization and that you guys have been responsible for creating and put it in other places and watch it grow and watch it flourish and watch it transform those industries the same way that we've transformed ours. I do hope, though, that when we look back those 5 or 10 years down the road, that we're still not satisfied, that we're still focused on where else we all need to go together and how we can get there working together. So thanks very much for your time. I appreciate it. Happy Greenbuild, everybody.
Oh, yes. Yes, I do. Thank you. All right. All right. I hope you're as excited as I am by what everyone had to say and share today. We've been working on this for a long time, and we're really excited to get to talk about it. LEED 4.1 is a product of years of market feedback, as Corey said. We've got lessons learned through the projects that have certified and the investment in new technologies. And this is our chance to really innovate. This is our chance to be agile and see what the evolution of the rating system can bring. And this is market transformation, like we talked about, and this is the movement that's been responsible for it. The story that Wes has told of what happened in California, other jurisdictions, is a great example of the way that we can affect change at many levels. For LEED, raising the bar on the built environment, influencing code, which turns into a ramp for future versions of LEED. And with 4.1, we definitely are ensuring that teams have a rating system that pushes to achieve higher performance, tracking and measuring that performance, and removing market barriers that stand in our way. And as you heard from Scott yesterday at the International Summit and from Megan today, performance and transparency will become even more important in future versions of LEED. We're starting that shift in 4.1, and thanks to ARC, we can really introduce that to the world, the next era of green building. ARC powers LEED, and LEED leverages ARC in turn. As we look at the vision of where we go next, we're expanding the knowledge and the movement to cover spaces that are bigger than the building, the connective tissue that touches the buildings, and of course, all the areas that are not the building. Expanding to cover cities, neighborhoods, water, power, all the good things that Brendan talked about, and everything that's connected to our movement. Taking those lessons learned, connecting the dots, and really having a good time imagining the future. The innovation, it's fun, it's inspiring. We really invite you to come along with us. It's the only way that we're going to accomplish our goals is this next era of reinvention. Striving faster, moving forward. We're here to hit 100 billion square feet of LEED certified space in the next 5 years. That's 10x from where we are today. It's an ambitious goal, it's an audacious goal, but we love those audacious goals. We're here to challenge, we're here to transform. We're here to ensure that green buildings and communities are available for all. And we're here to lead on. We're all in. Thank you. I'm going to welcome my fellow presenters back. We're going to do some Q&A. And I want to say, for everyone who's still here, we'd love to have you join us for a group photo. We want to commemorate this moment. So after we do some Q&A, if you all will stick around and help us get together and take a picture. Thanks to everybody who's already been tweeting about the session. That's awesome. So we'll give you one more photo to tweet out. So everyone's coming out. Great. So we have time for Q&A. And also, if you're going to ask a question, please just come up to one of the mics because we're recording the session. So we want to make sure we get everybody on audio.
Wow, that's bright.
All right. Questions? Please.
All right, okay, so going along with the theme of strategies to outcomes, I know y'all had strategies for your presentations, and I want to give you a little feedback on the outcome, which would be how we took it in and where we're going with it. So I would say from Melissa to Megan, I was feeling pretty good. I was like going with the flow. It all was making sense. And with Brendan, I'm totally stressed out.
Oh, no. Thanks. I'm actually really excited about that. That's awesome.
No, well, then the outcome, this could be a good performance score for you. Now, I'm torn between two things. One is worrying about everything that Brendan laid out and needing to go straight to the bar, or being thankful that Brendan is thinking about all these things and he's got it under control. No, but I really appreciate the big picture that was put out. You know, as somebody who's, you know, a practitioner and involved in a lot of technical discussion, it's very easy to get bogged down in all the details over this and that, BTU and stuff. And it's really helpful to have this whole big picture. There is one point of somewhat confusion. The relationship between ARC and the rating systems. I understand that ARC is a platform and the rating systems are rating systems. But ARC also has a technical component in the scoring. And I don't understand sort of the LEED technical core is dealing with the rating systems. How does that relate to the technical aspect of ARC that feeds into the rating systems?
I don't know if you want to start. I would say, I think the simplest way to think about it is to think like you would any other reference standard, that there is a score that's built into ARC, and that we can reference that the way we might reference ASHRAE 90.1 or other standards that we reference. LEED as a standard of standards. And so we're using that scoring as a reference for, at least on the O&M side, and then also the ability to track and manage data is integral to the work that we're talking about. But I think to get to your question, it's really looking at that as a reference point that we're looking at for the score and how that helps, what that tells us about our building, and how that in turn becomes part of the LEED rating system for O&M. And we certainly don't want to lose the great strategies and other sort of best practices that our committees have put together over the years. So we'll continue to share those and emphasize their importance, as Megan showed in the mapping, but we're looking at really the rating coming more from the performance side and the score side. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Corey. Other questions, comments? Hopefully we didn't stress you out too much.
No, I want
But I think a
you
little
guys
stress
stressed
is
out about
healthy
this.
because we got to get everybody
Action. We
thinking,
want
right,
action.
about what comes
Yeah.
next. Yeah,
Really-
the action is going to come from the stress.
I appreciate that. I love that comment. Thank you very much. I thought you were going to say it way too long.
Hi, my name is Prateek, and my question is about all the emphasis on performance in the future LEED rating systems. So what are some of the lessons learned from the LEED dynamic clock that were incorporated into ARC? And this is connected with the Dodge Data and Analytics study about green building in 2016, which said that in the US, the percentage of projects that don't track their performance is very high compared to the rest of the world, which is surprising because lower operating costs and good energy performance are some of the primary drivers for green building in first place.
Yeah, I'd say the LEED dynamic plaque to ARC and some of the lessons learned, a lot of projects have really been able to shift their focus from, okay, we've implemented LEED, we've gone through this checklist, now let's see, how that is being effective. And if they've gone in and they've used ARC and they've gotten their score and they found, oh, we're not performing nearly as well as we thought we were going to based on the LEED strategies that we've implemented, they've been able to go back and figure out exactly what's been causing the issue. And we've actually found that with a lot of projects, they have identified a key source. Maybe their water score is really low because they were using a lot of water for irrigation that they just didn't realize was happening. And they're then able to correct that issue. So the strategy is, in theory, are working. Sometimes they have to figure out some of these bumps along the way to make sure that they're working. And the score helps them to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Beth Brummett. I just wanted to say thank you, Brendan, for saying what I have and a lot of us have been thinking about. And I just wanted to acknowledge that it's, I think of it as a left foot, right foot thing. We have to go into that messy space. There's a time and a place for that. And there's a time and a place to get really practical, number our credits, make it easy for people to use them, and have this technical part, robust and interactive. And over the many years, I can't even count how many green builds this has been, but I've always appreciated that the thinking is steps ahead of where the systems are. And so let's keep going. More work ahead. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yay. That's great.
You first. You were there earlier.
Yeah.
Hey, so I have a question for y'all. Over the last many years of my career in green building, we've been learning a lot about best practices and how to do this with buildings. And we have incorporated a lot of new capabilities in our teams. And with ARC and being all based on performance, we need more guidance in terms of how to convince our clients. So for me, now the LEED reference guides for new construction has become okay, this is the standard for best practice. And then ARC is just the ongoing part. But we need a lot more guidance for ARC in order not to lose what we have gained over the years in terms of acknowledging, for example, commissioning. You mentioned it there, but how do we still convince our clients that it's kind of a prerequisite or a best practice? And just to mention commissioning, but there are some other things, now with LCA and EPDs and all those kinds of things, when are you going to put this reference guide for ARC, maybe, where we can say, okay, these are the best practices. These are the things that we recommend that not to miss when you're doing a building, or is that in the plans? Or how do we contribute with you to create this documentation that it's always so useful, going to the website and find the details or specifics on every credit, it's always so helpful. And I think that is kind of missing with ARC. Sometimes it's just so broad, it's about performance, but how do we find all these resources that we used to have with every single credit that was so specific, that was a clear path, a clear methodology, all those kinds of things? I mean, that's something that I worry about, and I just want to know if you have a plan for that. Thank you.
And I have two answers. One is that I'm really glad to hear you ask for that, because I do think that we, as Megan showed in the mapping, need to expose that mapping of those best practices to LEED and how they contribute to a positive or high performance score, and continue to emphasize those best practices for folks that have low scores. Where do they look? So I think we want to maintain that infrastructure we've built with O&M and make sure that we don't lose that. The other piece of that is I think as people start to look more and more at performance and understand, and we build more analytics into ARC, we'll be able to answer that question maybe in a new way. Even the idea that there's power in data and sort of showing, well, what have your neighboring buildings done to achieve a high performance score? Or if you need to jump a couple of points, what can you tweak and what can you change? So I think there's a lot that we can do with the data and do with the platform that we've really just begun to explore. So we want to keep bringing those pieces together and maybe even making it a little bit more dynamic and based on the data that we're able to use.
Yeah, and thank you for that feedback. One other answer I'd like to add to that is I think our current LEED reference guides are also the sort of the reference guide for ARC, because if you think about it, a lot of the LEED strategies that are outlined in those reference guides really do help to improve your performance score, so they're directly linked.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for all the information you provided, and it is a news for me today, though. Before I left California, I just sent a proposal to a hotel clients of using 4.0 on maintenance and operation. So the master plan is to divide the effort into 4 years. Every year they get from a basic one to silver to gold to platinum. Now this is a news for me, 4.1. So what's the best suggestion?
Do you want to take that one?
Fix it, Corey.
Yeah. So at least with 4.1, I think 4.1 is going to be quite related to version 4, and there will be fairly close alignment. When we put 4.1 out into the market, we will also still have version 4 until everything is balloted and has gone through public comment. So the incremental step with version 4.1 hopefully won't be as drastic as sort of the steps we've made in the past with our rating systems. So I think there will be sort of the continuity that you need to continue tracking performance and striving for higher levels of performance. So we're not, this version really isn't about new ideas or new credits. It's really just about adjusting what's already in there and making it easier.
And assuming for the same project, they could start with a 4.0, end up with a 4.1 without redoing everything.
Exactly, yeah.
That's
you would be able to,
assumption.
To upgrade to 4.1 if certain things worked better for you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, two things, one comment, one question. The comment is quick. Every year for the past umpteenth years, we come to Greenbuild, and each time I'm looking for that shot in the arm so that I can come, kind of shake off the dust of the daily grind of kind of churning out buildings, and hopefully they're as green as possible. I'm coming here to look for a shot in the arm amongst the LEED family, the USGBC family, and this is the session that did the shot in the arm this year. So thank you for that. So the question is about ARC. So I'm with a DC area firm that is firmly entrenched in the federal market, primarily DoD. So what that means in the framework of what you're talking about here and the relationship between ARC and the progress of the rest of the rating systems is that there's no fit because of the DoD relationship, which I'm sure that you guys are aware of. So I don't have, when I'm talking to the quote unquote owner, that future certification, that sharing of information, the idea that you can benchmark against like facilities, I don't have that as a point of launch for any discussion. So when I look at ARC and understanding that I can't really apply it to, the myriad of projects that I do have, and these are building types that are some energy hogs and, some multifamily housing, and it runs the full gamut. But we are relying, and in truth, we're selling the idea of measurement and verification of the ability to do advanced metering, of the opportunity to track, and through tracking, kind of get improvements through knowing, because you can't improve what you don't know. So you collect this data. I wonder, in the context of all of that, without ARC, how does ARC differ from the data collection that we're doing as a pursuit of credits? How is it giving a better feedback than, say, feeding the opportunity to feed the data into the system and be able to compare your buildings that way? So kind of what's the difference? Because I can't interact with ARC with my clients.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big differences of just collecting and reporting the data that you're doing internally and whatever benchmarking you're doing at that time, and what we do with ARC and how that provides you with different feedback to help you understand where you need to improve is how we're looking at the data and benchmarking it against other like buildings that we also know are high performers, and just the depth of that baseline that we're able to create and provide that really meaningful feedback to you. In terms of how we apply kind of the special set of buildings, I think we would need to talk offline about that a little bit more, but I'm sure we can figure out a solution.
And I mean, I think Megan's right. It's that, DoD is collecting a lot of information and they have tremendous design goals, but other than reporting up potential energy savings, I don't know that there's a lot of looking at, how those
Kind of
buildings compare to each other, right?
Collect information.
Exactly, or what can the bar be for higher performance? So
Right.
it's really that conversation of sort of where can you go on the existing building side and trying to sort of push that. And so certainly, and we have had conversations, but we can continue to talk about how we do that in a very secure world where we know we can't necessarily receive data. So
Right.
yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit more.
And just FYI, with LEED v4, and I guess moving into the world of 4.1, as you develop and start to push that out, I'm getting a lot of pushback on, from my data center-esque clients, a lot of pushback on outlet control. I know that's way in the weeds, but it's definitely something to consider. And it just hasn't been run up the flagpole yet, but it's coming. So.
Yeah, that's come up already, and it is something we're looking at.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Todd Isherwood from Boston. Welcome. First a comment, then a quick question. I've been getting a lot of feedback from the industry here in Boston that, obviously we're bragging here. We have more LEED buildings per capita than any other state in the country. The problem, that's good. The challenge that I've been hearing from building owners and from industry is that as you see LEED 4.1 comes out on performance. And I think we're beginning to realize as a family of sustainable consultants that we're having a hard time operating our buildings. And one of those is because of the education of the middle skilled workers who are tasked to operate these buildings. I mean, we're great at producing engineers and architects and designing and delivering and putting these buildings on the street. But I think what we're beginning to see now is that the real metrics come in that are not being operated as designed. What is USGBC and GBCI's sort of response, if you will, to educating middle skilled workers or trade workers so that we will see these buildings perform as designed? So that's the word we're hearing right now, is that the newer technology has come out, the harder it is for these middle school workers to tackle. is there an education credentialing program out there for middle school workers?
So I think it's a great point. I mean, one of the things that we know about high technology buildings is that they have the potential to be the best performers, but they also have the opposite.
Exactly.
Right? If you run a Ferrari the wrong way, it's going to be really, really terrible. There are a couple of efforts that are underway. There's an effort that was done by Urban Green, which is the USGBC chapter in New York City, and their effort's called G-Pro, I believe, and it was targeted at those types of professions that are in the operational phase. I do think that more work is needed to be done. I think it's a great point where that handoff is not necessarily as good as it needs to be, and that operational disconnect is systemic throughout the building industry. It's not just a green building problem; it's an every building problem. I think that one of the things that I like about what ARC does is that it gives people the ability to contextualize and look, right? Because I think one of the things that we learned when we did some studies around this was that there is a direct correlation between high-performing buildings and knowing who to talk to in the building about the energy bill. If you call a building and they know who to direct you to, there's a very good chance that that building is going to be performing well. If they don't know who to direct you to, there's a very good chance that building's not going to be performing well. All right, so there's a lot of layers to that I think are worth digging into. I'd be happy to. We're kind of running a little short on time, but if you want to hang around, we're happy to chat with you a little bit further.
And we do have a robust education at USGBC, both online and in person. We have a number of education partners, some community colleges and others that are trying to meet the needs that you've identified, but we are always welcoming more and really do like those partnerships and linking up because we definitely understand the needs you've identified. So we are officially at time, but I have a couple more people in line, so if you want to ask a short question, feel free, and then we'll take our picture. So you've been patient.
Okay, sorry. So could you elaborate more on, you've been talking about balloting LEED 4.1 as it kind of rolled, as performance is a huge component of it already. Will that, or will it include balloting the ARC performance metrics as well in terms of the guidelines for that? And if not, why not? I think as a practitioner and other consultants who kind of understand, what's behind the scenes of the score and sort of understand the algorithms, I think a lot of us have some kind of some angst around that. So if you could talk about whether or not that will be addressed in 4.1 or really at all going forward, because it seems like ARC, as it stands, hasn't really changed since it's been launched. So we would, I guess, would like to know whether or not we should kind of stop, raising quite a fuss about it because it doesn't seem like it's changing, or is there a chance that you guys are actually considering, changing some of the performance metrics or the algorithms?
Yeah, and that is the goal of 4.1. So as we integrate the performance scores into the rating system, we will explain the scores, put them into the rating system, and that would also be out for public comment and ballot. So we really are hoping to get good feedback on all of that. I know we've gotten a lot of feedback already, and this is certainly an opportunity to really get that consensus around what that score should be, and then also have the ability to write a reference guide around that and how we can support that score and educate people on what they can be doing to improve that score. So, so yes, that is all included in this development process.
Great.
You don't need to answer this right now, but maybe this is food for thought. This is about the sustained performance of LEED-rated buildings through the entire life cycle of the building, maybe say 25, 50 years, because all buildings degrade over time. So what has LEED done to address the standards for LEED-rated buildings and their performance compared to other benchmark buildings over a period of, say, 50 years? Have you considered doing any studies that could help us understand how LEED rated buildings perform compared to other buildings over a certain lifetime? That's just a question. I mean, I know we're out of time. I don't want to keep you guys here, but maybe that's food for thought.
Thank you.
Yes, great session. It was very eye-opening, a lot of good stuff coming. The most critical slide that I saw was the one where you showed the percentage of credits that were not achieved. And you had and looking at scorecards that we typically do as a consulting firm, they lined up with exactly in the categories that we said maybes and no. So shortest part of my question would be, did you receive feedback as to why? I mean, obviously you're going to use that to tailor the new rating system, but if you did receive feedback, why, which credit was like the one that stood out the most?
A good question.
You have to pick one.
Feedback on why they were had low achievement rates? Yeah, so we've gotten feedback across all of the credits and certainly hear it on a continuous basis from projects that are pursuing LEED before and projects that have already certified. So, it's really, I think it still goes back to the materials category and those credits just not being actionable at this point. We've had, like I mentioned, we've had significant advancements in the conversation, moving that forward, and I think we've had significant transformation. But it's still been hard to implement a lot of those, and some of those are just non-starters at this point. Sourcing option 1 is the one I would say is the least achievable credit, and that's one we'll spend a lot of time on for 4.1. So.
And I think too, there's a lot of that sort of health and comfort conversation that requires maybe a learning curve. I think about acoustics a lot, right? We know from the science that it's an important part of comfort. It's important for patients to heal in hospitals. It's important for people to be productive in their work, but it requires an extra person to come in. Perhaps our thresholds are not where they need to be depending on the use of the space. So there's added cost and there's learning curve for the team. So there's some things like that we know we don't want to lose that because it's important, but it's going to take some time, and all of us will need to work together, right? So that's my challenge to you guys. All of us need to work together to figure out how to make it work in the project. So some of it is the learning curve, and then some of it is, as Corey was talking about, things that we just know we're going to need to keep working with and changing. So, it's not, we don't want to be too predictive based on the sample size we have so far with the credits just saying, oh, that's just not achievable. But it is telling sometimes where people need, or just, learning and need to work on things, so.
I guess it's comforting and discomforting that I'm saying to my clients, this might be costly, this might be not achievable, but that is what the industry's saying. So it's, like I said, it's a comfort to myself, but it's disheartening, and but what it does is makes me want to work more with you guys to help that.
Yes. And I do think back, and we've got sort of the long view of people, Brendan's been around almost from the beginning, of other places where we knew it was hard and it took some time, but we've really seen the industry step up and grow, and now those credits are achievable. So I don't think it means we can't get there. It just means that there's work to be done, so.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Have a great week.